Okay, everybody, welcome back. I am so delighted today to be joined by the magnificent Miranda Cowley Heller. I have been waiting to do this interview, Miranda, on like pins and needles. You just said that you are sweltering, but you're in the UK and I am sweltering and I'm in Phoenix. So I want to know which one of us has it worse.
I think possibly you, but I don't know Phoenix very well, to be
Well,
honest.
tell me what the temperature is, and you're going to need to convert it to Fahrenheit because
Uh,
I don't
Good news, I have no idea. Bad news, somebody is knocking at my front door, so I'm going to
Oh,
ignore them, but
you could go get it. I can pause it.
pause for 1 second. I just need
Yeah.
to tell them to go away.
Go,
Yeah?
go tell him to go away. Tell
Okay,
everyone to
I'll be
go
right
away.
back. So
Yes.
sorry.
Nope.
That was not.
It never is, Miranda. It never is.
All right.
I might leave that in because, no, like the whole basis for this podcast is what really goes on. It's usually what really goes on in the book writing world, but I feel like it's also becoming what really goes on just in life.
Okay, well, that was a pair of Adidas being delivered, and then the guy knocking at the door and then walking away with them. So that's what goes on in my life, by the way.
Okay. You're like, yeah,
Very, very exciting.
I didn't need those anyway because I'm not going outside because it's sweltering. Do you have humidity over there?
Oh yeah, it's England, so it rains all the
Okay,
time.
okay, fair. I've not been to
It's
England.
very humid. I honestly don't know the temperature because I don't understand the difference between Fahrenheit and Celsius, and so they put it out there, and I just go, "It's really hot." He's knocking again. It's unbelievable. The guy does not get it.
I can't.
I guess I'm not going to get my sneakers because he refuses.
Do you want to go get? Can you just scream? Leave it at the door? Like,
Just
will he?
did. I asked him to leave it at the door.
Well,
So
feel free to go back and deal with that because
okay, this is so awful, but
this is what goes on in Miranda's life, guys. Like, it's not all roses. I really was going to pause this, but I think this is real. This is the real deal. She's got to get her Adidas. I always thought it was Adidas, and now I feel like it's Adidas. I'm going to ask her about that one. We're going to get to the books. Don't worry. Here she comes.
here she comes with
Do you have the shoes? Oh my God.
just to prove.
This is so fan. Now, do you say Adidas or Adidas?
I say Adidas, and here they say
Oh,
Adidas.
so for so long, people are, if you're listening and you're like, are we going to talk about books? We are. For
Yeah,
so long, I said Adidas as a joke.
that's British. You're very British.
Oh my God. I also say garage.
Garage is also, you're obviously
I
British. What are you doing in
obviously,
Phoenix?
believe me right now, I don't freaking know. I ask myself that on the daily. What am
What
I
is the
doing here?
temperature there?
Well, today it's supposed to be 115.
Oh gosh.
Right.
Okay, not like that here, but here is super humid. So
That's what I was going to say. And if I had to pick one, I'd honestly pick this.
desert. Well, and also they don't really have air conditioning in England.
Oh,
So
no. Oh, no,
I
no,
don't have AC
no,
right now. So no.
no. On my daily gratitude, like my mental gratitude list right now is air conditioning. My air conditioning went out in my car last week. And I was like, why does the universe, like, I know the universe doesn't hate me, but in this moment, I feel like it might be angry with me. Like, really? I got,
It might
it's
be.
fine.
It might be.
All right. So here, okay. Your first book, can we talk about the Paper Palace for a moment?
Of course.
We're going to talk about the Paper
Absolutely.
Palace. We're going to talk about this delightful gem. This
Yeah.
gem, by the way, so for people who aren't for our listening and not watching, Miranda's just released or is about to release. Has this come out yet?
In the UK
Okay.
last month, but tomorrow is my pup date
It
in the
is.
States.
Well,
Yeah.
this is so
I
delightfully
know.
timed. Okay.
Excellent
So
timing.
it's your first book of poetry. And I want to talk to you about poetry after I ask you about something about the Paper Palace, because this is what's the word I'm looking for? We don't have words here. It's a misleadingly small, the word I want is not misleadingly, but I can't think of it right now. It looks small. It's a small little book, but it is rich in all the things. Like, okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So before I lose my train of thought,
The
because
only thing I would just add quickly is that one reviewer or critic called it a novel written in verse. And I thought, well, novella probably, but in terms of just like the size of the story in a way that you can combine poetry and fiction in a certain
and
sense.
Also, to play off of that critic, although I heard critic and I got nervous, I was ready to go fight somebody. But then we have this one, which is the difference between them. I'm going to ask you about this, but the, what would we call this? The pentameter? I don't know poetic terms at all, but this is written almost like an essay, not like a poem,
Yeah.
which I loved and want to ask you about. Okay, so let's go back to the paper pals. So you are one of these unicorns who, the exception, not the norm, but the exception we all want to be, where your debut is just because Paper Palace was the debut, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the way you're looking at me right now, all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, is she like,
No.
okay. Um, the debut does so well. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's a Reese's book pick. It's all the things. So I have a couple questions. Number one, how long did it take for you to get, like, was that the first book that you wrote, pitched, all the things? Yes. Okay. So you really are a unicorn. Okay. How long did it take? How long was that process of writing the book and all that?
Well, writing the book was a kind of on again, off again process because, am I going to try to write a novel? Okay, I'll try. And then maybe I'll fail, but nobody has to know. And, I remember when I got to like, but I didn't even know, like we talked about word count in those days. I was like, oh, I just wrote page 100. Maybe it will turn into a novel. Like it was, I was just, and then I would go for sort of swathes of time and not write at all because I was busy doing other things for work or whatever, and writing poetry actually, because poetry precedes the novel. It just happens to be published after the novel.
Okay.
But and in fact, some of it ended up in the novel almost verbatim. But in any event, so the process of getting from point A to a first draft was probably like 4 years or something, maybe 5. I mean, because I really wasn't doing it all the time.
You know what's funny about that is you said only 4 or 5 years. As though
I think I said almost, but or maybe I said no. I don't
okay,
honestly.
well, I mean, it's
I
different.
don't actually know the answer.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's clarify because I certainly don't want to put words in anybody's mouth.
I am
but
not
I just
fast. I'm not slow. I'm a very fast writer, but I am very, let's say, like very ADD. So I either am doing it or I'm going to a flea market and looking for old pottery or something.
Yeah.
Somehow or other, I'm. They have that. I remember there's a term like ass in chair writers, and that's what every morning or da 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 da. And I am quite literally the opposite.
Thank you.
So there's that. And we can talk about all that later if you want to. But so that happened, and I was in a wonderful writing group, and I had a mentor in that who ran that, and so then I went back and did some drafts, of course, as one does. But the most sort of amazing part of the process was once I got getting an agent, but then once I'd gotten an agent who I love passionately, was that we put it out there into the world on a Friday, and she said, well, it could take a few. I said, well, I'm supposed to go to London next Friday and this and that. And she said, well, just stay nimble. She said, I don't know what's going to happen. And she'd submitted on Friday. On Monday, she already had like 10 meetings for me set for Thursday and Friday. And then I flew to New York on the Wednesday. I'd never met her, had all of these amazing meetings, which was incredibly fun. And then got on a plane on the Friday to London because a friend of mine was very ill, and that's why I had to go. And then the auction was Tuesday. And that was it was the craziest thing. And it was just beyond. I mean, that part was so exciting. I was actually in a pub with friends in London, and I'd have kept, go out to the outside. And I don't have I'm sorry, my service is terrible. It was so exciting. And then, so that happened. And I went with Riverhead, obviously, and Sarah. And then the British auction was the day I was flying back. The week later, was flying back so that week in London, I met all the British people. So it was just incredibly, incredibly exciting, of course. Duh. So yeah,
now did it okay, so I have 2 questions related to that. I feel like we're going down this. Are you when you were in younger, like elementary school, did you have to do the diagramming of the sentences where it was like the noun and then you have I don't even remember, but the verb came down on a diagonal line and then the subject. Okay, I'm clearly much
I think
older than
I'm
you
too
are.
I think I'm no, I think
No,
I'm
I
too old for that. I'm much older.
I think it's like when I
I'd
people have
place
a visceral reaction.
money. I'd place money.
I'll take that bet. When people have a visceral reaction to that memory of the diagramming. So if anyone's ever done it, they know what I'm talking about. If they are confused, they've never had to do it. So I'm not going to use that as an example. But the point is, I'm seeing myself going down multiple different paths here. The first one is, you always, or had you always wanted to be a writer? Had you been writing poetry or something for so long?
Well, I mean, as a very tiny child, first of all, I come from a family of writers and editors. And so the whole concept of literature was always very, very present. My father was a book editor, and he's also a writer. My grandfather was a poet, a writer, book editor. He was Kerouac's editor. He was,
Oh my gosh.
Faulkner's editor.
Really?
Yeah. So he was sort of a literary, giant among the sort of editorial world, or the, world of people chronicling writers. He was best friends with Hemingway, blah, blah, blah. So that whole world was very much, a background noise all the time. And I spent an enormous amount of time with my grandparents in Connecticut because my parents had gotten divorced very young, and, lots of new marriages, and the, original kids get, happily left with the grandparents. But so I was very, very influenced by that. Having said that, I recently found, last Christmas actually, on Cape Cod, I found apparently my first published piece of writing, which was written out by my stepfather, who's a painter. But in one of his sketch pads, I found in pencil he'd written a poem out with my name at the bottom and the date from when I was 5 years old. So that was like
Oh
the
my God.
first, right? And then I also found this, not at that point, but at a different point, I guess I would call it my first book I published, which was a book of nature poems that I wrote when I was 8 for my grandfather's birthday present. On like little construction paper, with these little pieces of paper. And I saw, I put my, like, Miranda Cowley, with the, author. I mean, I really took myself far too seriously. One of my favorite things is that the 5-year-old poem at 5, then the title was "The Path is Long," and the main poem in my first book was called "Life." I was 8.
Talk about foreshadowing.
Well, by the way, the path is long, so I wasn't completely wrong. If you're lucky, the path is long. But yeah, I was like, this is hilarious when I saw that. I just couldn't believe it. So the answer is yes. I always thought literature, literary world. Always, big, huge reader, wanted to be a writer. Went off and ended up being in the editorial side of things instead, and I was too scared, actually. At a certain
Really?
point, I got really, really overwhelmed with the critiquing of my family. I remember my father, it was my first like big actual school paper or whatever. And I'd done it on Dutch painters, and I had so proud of it. I was probably 11, and I brought it out to, wherever he and his wife were living. And the first sentence was, "The Dutch painters were the greatest painters who ever lived." And he literally just looked up and went, "I'm sorry, you can't say that. You have to say they were among the greatest painters who ever lived." So that was what I was dealing with.
My mom is an editor. She was not a book editor, but I mean, she's still with us, thank God. Well, she's an editor. And what she edited, though, was like very corporate stuff. So from the time that I could speak and I could say, me and Katie, my sister, want to be the president of the United States, she'd say,
Oh,
Katie and I. Right. And so I'm so grateful for it now. At the time, it did give me that. Sometimes I was almost afraid to speak. And I'm curious if your family's immersion in the literary world, did it feel almost like too much pressure, or did it make you feel like, well, this isn't hard. I have all these people who have done it and they have connections, and fill in the blank.
no. It was absolutely too much pressure. My grandfather said constantly, "You have to get your name in print. You have to get your name in print." When I was in high school, when I was in college, and you have to try out for the paper, and you have to do this and you have to do that. And as a result, I was like a deer in the headlights. I couldn't do anything because I was so afraid of
Wow.
failing. I mean, that's the reason I didn't publish a novel until I was in my 50s, is because I was so in my own head. All I could do was like get like absolute panic. Oh gosh, it won't be good enough. I'll get credit. Right. So that is, I had to really learn to get out of my own way. And that, yeah, clearly took a while. I had a lot of divergent paths along the way. But I did start out my quote unquote career after college as a, well, first as an assistant and then as a book editor, magazine
Mhm.
editor, but a
Mhm.
book editor. So I went straight into that world. Then I fell madly in love a couple of years after I'd been made editor and moved to Italy for love. But I was living with this painter, and my idea was 100% this will work because I'm going to write, the great American novel. And it just was crap. I just couldn't do anything. I was just so self-conscious. The writing was
Wow.
not coming at all from an organic place. And poetry is actually what got me back. Going back to poetry is what got me back to the organic place and freedom and like loving the blank page. Because with a poem, you have nothing in your head when you start.
And
It's
so all right, before I get to the poetry, because I don't want to forget to ask you this question. When the Paper Palace, just in this sort of whirlwind way, it sold quickly, it hit New York Times quickly, then the Reese's book, and did that give you a sense of, well, I don't want to even lead you. What was your reaction to that? What was it?
um well, I mean, unbelievable thrill. I will say this, and I think this comes from having been an editor for many, many years as well, and I did some ghostwriting and so on. Um, I'm very lucky that I have the ability to write something and then go back to it as if I'm not me and read it as an editor,
Yeah.
as if I'm somebody else, and see the weaknesses and see the flaws. And I think part of why it took me so long to write the book, I write fast, but it was because I would go back and go, oh, that needs to be filled out, or this needs to happen here, and that hasn't happened. And because I could see it, right? I could hear it through somebody else's ears in a way. And I think that's just something I'm very, very lucky to have been raised, with that sort of editing gene.
Yes.
Um, so I will say this, that when I put it out into the world, like even just to get an agent, and I didn't use any connections, is that I knew that it was good. What I didn't know was if anyone would get it, because it was to me so sort of odd and specific, and it's a literary novel, but it has a pulse. And, I just thought, and obviously has an odd structure. And I thought, it is possible that this will not sell at all and I will be crestfallen, but I know that I'm putting something good into the world. And that's like, that maybe sounds egotistical or something. I mean, it took me a very long time to get to that place, but I did know that.
Mhm.
Having said that, the rest was just unbelievable, of course. And the most amazing was that the week that it was published, they had said at Riverhead, like it seems like there's a possibility that you might make the New York Times bestseller list. Like there's a possibility. We don't know. Don't get your hopes up, and so on. And I was on Cape Cod actually, and I was on the phone with my shrink and call waiting, and I saw it was my editor. And so I answered the phone, and Sarah, I was like all nervous, and she said, so you just debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And I became hysterical in tears. I'm talking to my shrink. Went back. Well, I have to go. I got to call, and I called my father. He started weeping. He called, yelled down to my sisters. Then I called my mother. And she goes, oh, I'm having a martini with Flossie. She's on the pond, And I told her, and she went, well, why are you crying? That's good news. And I went, and she went, anyway, my martini is going to get, I can't let it get warm. Bye bye, So, right. Anyway,
That
but it was quite, but I like the fact, I mean, it was just such a good classic, the two. So that was one of the like
yeah.
unbelievable moments. The funniest thing is that my first sale, actually, it was in Croatia, I believe, before it sold in America. I'm pretty sure it was Croatia. It might have been Serbia. Anyway, that was my
Like
first
sale
thing.
to a reader or
Sale,
to
no, sale to a publisher.
yeah, okay.
Like before the auction, they'd gotten an offer
Okay.
from, yeah. Um, anyway, cervication. Well, anyway, they got an offer. I'm probably getting this embarrassingly wrong, but anyway, cut it out if I'm getting it wrong. But anyway, so that was really like hilarious to me. Now it's been life changing. To be honest, it's been life changing in many, many ways.
Tell me what those are, if you would, because one of the things I really do love to do, and it's not because I'm a negative person. I mean, I have a sign, I show it with frequency right up there. It says everything is possible. I firmly believe that. I'm a huge optimist and I'm also a realist. And one of the things that I love to do is to just clarify people's expectations because I think sometimes people think, oh my gosh, if I hit number one on the New York or if I get on the list or whatever, my life is made. Like I am in the machine. Every book I write from this point forward will be accepted. I'm financially secure forever. No one can touch me. And again, it's not to negate the beautiful moments and the beautiful things that happen as a result of that kind of and see the air quote, but success, because everybody has to define that for themselves. What for you was maybe it did work and didn't work the way that you thought it might?
That's a really interesting question because I think part of it does have to do with age. And by the way, you can tell anybody, it doesn't make you financially secure forever. Just sell a book, just FYI. Not that that's an issue here, but the expectations are so high, of course.
Sure.
For me, because I'd spent so much of my life on the other side, I'd spent my career, even when I was in television, when I was in producing, when I was always being the editor, the critic, the person who's correcting, not the artist, as it were. And for me, had set up this, I had defined myself young as a writer, and then I just wasn't. And I spent so many years thinking, and sort of making little attempts at not writing a novel, and when I finally decided to do it, it was like a last gasp. I'd gone back to get a graduate degree in art history, all sorts of things that happened that are now in retrospect incredibly lucky. With my husband's work, he was going to be transferred to New York, and I had been accepted to a PhD thing in California, and then the New York thing got shifted back, and I'd now gone to New York, blah, blah, blah. And one of my best friends said, "You've been talking about this writing and that you feel like a failure as long as I have known you. You've just said I have this 1 year and I don't know what to do now because I said, yes and no to two different things." She said, "Why don't you make the decision? You're going to try to write it. You're going to give yourself this year. And if you don't do it or don't start something, that's it." And I went, okay. And that's kind of how I started, right? So, but I think more specifically to your question, I always have been the person behind the person.
Yeah.
And that is a great role in many ways, to have a dream and step into it and then have it be meaningful to other people and translate. And it's not about prizes or success at that sense at all. What is amazing to me is the readers who write to me out of the blue from all these different countries and talk about something that's become so meaningful to them. That makes me feel whole. Like there's this whole community of people out there who share a feeling with me, and it's a really wild feeling. That for me is by far the best part, but also obviously then having the confidence, and it made me much more independent as a person because also I was going through it. My marriage was breaking up sort of during it and after, really, although I'm still married as it happens. I mean, technically, but anyway, but so then having to go out into the world and reinvent myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
The book had started while I was married for a long time, and the two things don't have anything to do with each other, much that people love to always think, fiction is memoir. But the thing of being suddenly alone for the first time, an empty nester at the same time for the first time, and having this book was it's like having a third child. But it was also I could stand on my feet and go, I did it. And that is if anybody, that's the main thing I would say to put out there, is that if you do the thing you always wanted to do, no matter how old you are, there's nothing like that.
because you
It's
did it.
better than having, like, for me, that experience, had I written 20, like, medianly, this was what I wanted, was to write a literary novel that would speak to people. That's what I wanted. That's what I dreamt of. So it has really changed my life. Definitely.
So, as someone who was behind the scenes, as you said, for so long, I mean, working on The Sopranos, for God's sake, how did it feel to suddenly and very quickly, almost jarringly so perhaps, be the not the target, but all the reviews start coming. And with good reviews come, of course,
Of course,
people
yeah.
who don't like the book or who are just having a bad day and they're taking that out, or they're envious of who knows why they do what they do. But how did you navigate that without having a lot of years to slowly acclimate to what it would be like to be not behind the person, but not behind the camera, but in front of the camera?
Hmm. I mean, I think that it sort of what I was saying earlier is almost the same answer, which is two things. One is I knew that it was good. Like, I knew the writing was good. And when you can feel confident in something, and also having been an editor in so many different iterations, one of the things I learned really early on when I was I worked as a book doctor for all these different literary agents at a certain point in my life and whatever, is there's really, I hate to say it, but there's no such thing as the great unpublished novel unless you haven't actually submitted it anywhere. When you're a reader looking through that pile, you're desperate for something really good. And so, all you want is to open something and go, oh yeah, oh my God, this could be something. That's, what you want. And of course, a lot of people don't have the courage actually to put their work out there. And that's really sad. Um, I guess what I'm trying to say is what I had was this sort of, I can be very insecure. So it's not that. It's just that I didn't have a particular kind of doubt that I'd always had. It was like, if like I was a musician, like I knew when I'd flubbed something, and I knew when I'd in the orchestra, done my part.
What did you play?
Flute.
Me too.
Really? That's so,
I mean, not in the orchestra, but go ahead.
no, well, I mean, high school, or no, please,
Yeah.
school,
I was
whatever.
in the marching band way back
There we go.
when. Yes.
Right,
That's
exactly.
exactly.
So when I think it's like that when it's not like an ego thing going, oh, I'm so good. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that when you are doing anything like that, particularly with music, you go, oh, that tone, I did it. And you also know when you didn't. So on that level, I was like, if people don't like it, they don't like it. No, not everybody's going to like anything. That part, I'm old enough and have been around enough. Do you like it when somebody hates your work? Of course not. It's horrible, right? And the personal attacks, of which there were a lot, that's really a different issue. And I really do take issue with people assuming something about you or saying, oh, I had people on the craziest responses, people calling me names, calling it sickening pornography, whatever. But then not even just saying that, but then saying, like, I was a whatever. Like, it was just horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I really think is upsetting. So then I just stopped reading anything.
Did you?
Yeah, I just stopped. I mean, you can't, after a certain point, you're like, you know what? It doesn't help to
Correct.
read any of that stuff. And everybody always says, don't you read when you're first time I mean, please. I was like, of course. I mean, please. But then after a while, I'm like, there's nothing to be done here. And there's going to be haters. And I think you feel about anything is people are going to like something or hate it. But when they attack you personally, that hurts.
Yes, I think that is where, for most people, the line, it's almost like it starts to infuse into your cells in a way that you kind of can't, you try to block it, but it's like there's no logical way to block that because our our initial reaction is to try to defend ourselves and say, like, wait, I'm not that. And then we worry, why would they think I am that? And so it can start to really if we're not careful and we don't have good people around us, therapists and friends and et cetera,
Therapist friend.
right? God bless the therapist, to bounce things off of and kind of assess, well, why am I feeling this way? Could there be a piece of truth? Certainly not to the really horrible stuff, but yeah, and I find that an interesting and almost not enjoyable in a masochistic way, but I anticipate me, or maybe, I don't know. I anticipate it. And so I'm kind of fascinated by it when it happens. Certainly not in like when people are just piling on, it's just being shoveled. But I think it's when people don't anticipate that and they're like, why is this happening? What is this going to do to my career? She's like, just let it be for 5 minutes. There'll be another drama or another pile on,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that, will
But it
happen.
is, I mean, it's sort of like those people who decide to go personal in that sense. It's almost like really mean girls in high school or grade school, who are trying to turn people against you and like mark you as the loser, whatever.
Yes.
It's kind of that same feeling. And like you're saying, it can be very destructive, even though you're a grown up and you go, this, whatever. Like, it's like somebody out there is trying to hurt me or doesn't, and it gets in under your skin.
Yeah.
Well, you just stop thinking about it. And like you said,
Well,
you have people around you.
and I think for people, and I'm just thinking this right now, but for people who did experience that kind of mean girl, I'm outside, the cool clique, the popular clique, if you did experience that in high school, elementary school, middle school, it starts bringing it all back. Because I've often said, as women specifically, I feel like we never really leave high school. Those cliques and the jabbing and we try to stay away from it as adults. We can
Mhm.
recognize it more and say that's not for me, but it's still out there.
It's still out
You want to go find a Mean Girls clique? Like, it's easier to find than I
there. They're everywhere
saw.
still.
They're
Yes.
everywhere.
They're still everywhere. I know.
Okay, so this gem, let us talk about what the deep water knows. My question really is this, because there's just deceptively, that's the word I was looking for, Miranda. It's deceptively small because you start reading it and all of a sudden I found myself being taken back to, like, it was reminding me of things that I didn't remember that I remembered about my own life, whether it was marriage, growing up, being a parent, any of those sorts of things. Poetry is such, and I'm going to use this word, it's not meant to be negative, but it's such a weird thing to me because it's really like there really are no rules, it feels like. But are there rules? Like
Hmm.
I won't edit poetry for the most, unless we're talking about, well, there are certain instances, but the majority no, because I just don't feel like I fully understand the rules around it. How do you?
I know. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's more like if you were going to like paint on somebody else's painting. You can't really do
Yes.
that, can you?
Yes.
So it's a much more, it comes from a much more unconscious or subconscious place. You write from a kind of dreaming brain, if that makes sense. It comes, you just open up and you don't know what you're going to write. Rules, I don't, unless you're doing like iambic pentameter or whatever, there are
Haiku.
rules if you're writing a sonnet. There are rules
Yeah.
in terms of if you are writing form, uh, or meter or poetry in that sense. Of course, I think you're saying something that I say a lot, which is that poetry, which used to be like the main and most accessible, when it was Keats, Shelley, or whoever, form of writing for everybody, and sort of emotional writing, it became something that people think is somehow either over their heads, out of their grasp. It's an insular, it's also poets are almost like academics. There's a lot of them, not all, obviously, but there's a very like, of course you're not going to get it kind of a thing.
Do you
And
think it's an elitist kind of
yeah, I mean,
sometimes space?
I mean, it's not an elitist space or medium, but I think that that is a piece of,
Mhm.
this little world where to get recognized in any way as a poet is incredibly difficult to be heard above anything, for starters. So poets kind of hate every other poet. So there's that, there's enormous amounts of jealousy and envy, which is, which I get, by the way. And also it's completely a personal, all poetry is personal, right? that does not mean it's about you or that it's memoir. What I mean is you don't write a poem about I don't even know what a gentleman in Moscow, a spy in wherever, China. You're not going to write, that's not a poem that you're going to write, right?
Right.
Um, it's about transmuting feeling or experience or something into words. And the words, in that sense, are much more like musical notes, actually. It's just about creating feeling, right?
Yes.
But I think if there's anything for me, it's that you write with nothing in your head, and out of it emerges something. And then you can go, oh, I want to dig into that. But it comes very much from one sort of dreaming brain. And so it's really a funny, amazingly freeing medium in a way. It's also terrifying to put it out there. I mean, I would say it's like putting out poems is like, to a certain extent, it's like putting out sort of snapshots of your soul. And, it's really much more difficult than putting out a novel, honestly.
Yes.
But I do feel very strongly that poetry is and should be one of the most important mediums for people. And I mean, I'm going to just talk about women, but obviously men and women, right? But you read somebody that really speaks to you, and it is a punch in the gut. It's so incredibly important. And there's amazing poets like a Mary Oliver, who is so popular that people start to go, oh, but she's so popular. She's an amazing poet, right? And I will read something of hers and just go, God, like, and you just want to carry it with you, you want to carry that thing, that image, that, like, so I feel like one of the things I really wanted was not to write poetry that's accessible in any way. That's not what you're thinking, but to like write something that somebody else can feel, that you can share it. It's very similar to, I mean, I think fiction and poetry are for me, incredibly similar. But that notion of you just write from this place, and then if somebody else is like moved or touched by it,
Yes.
that's what you want. And by the way, it's like comparing, you're a musician. It's like saying, Strindberg is better than Brahms. Well, just because, you can feel Brahms, doesn't mean Brahms is a commercial writer, right? It's not about level of quality.
Right.
But there's no reason that something should feel like it's inaccessible to somebody else.
Well, and that's why it feels to me sometimes like, poetry and essays are notoriously challenging to sell in the traditional publishing world. And it sometimes feels like, how do you even discern what is air quote good when it comes to poetry? Because what is good, it really, like you said, for me anyway, it's so dependent upon what moves you as the writer when it's coming out and what moves someone who would read it. One book of poetry that I did work on as an editor recently is Lindsay Shigemoto wrote a book called Revenge of Love, Letters of Hope. And she doesn't even really like to, and I don't mean to put words in her mouth, but she doesn't like to call it poetry. She calls them letters. And I'll have to ask her if that's because she feels uncomfortable calling herself a poet. I'll have to ask her that. I don't know.
Right.
But what's interesting is in working on it from an editing standpoint, I wasn't looking at it like, okay, this doesn't work from a narrative arc. It was more like there was a consistency issue or it felt like she could go deeper on something. Like I could feel it's all on feel. I could feel her hovering on an area. And then it was up to her to decide, do I want to go deeper with that or not? Which is sort of true with fiction or memoir as well. But it's such a more digestible, I can get more in a 2-line piece of poetry than I might get from an entire 100,000 word book.
Yeah. By the way, that's sort of what I was saying earlier. That's why that's one of the most important things. P.S. Particularly as our children are growing up with shorter and shorter attention spans. You know, by the way,
And me.
but that's for me. It's but no, but, truly, it's a form that I think I think it's really important. Obviously, I don't know how I mean, I know how I feel if something is working or isn't, or it speaks to me or doesn't, and a lot of that is if you want to go back and reread it a lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
if it stands
Yes.
the test of time, right?
Yes.
And so there's that. But then you come across something and it takes like a long, it's something, let's say, so simple. And then it's like there's a moment where it hits you, because that is one of the fun things about poetry is it's mysterious, because they'll, when you unpack it, that's why they kind of make you learn how to unpack it in school, right? Each metaphor, each piece, it's not purposeful, but it somehow comes out. Does that make sense? It's like people go, "Oh,
Yes.
what was the theme of your book?" And you're like, "Well, I didn't go like, oh, I'm going to write a book with a theme."
Right.
You write a book and then the theme comes out. Because if you
Right.
try to write a theme, it's going to be a kind of shitty book. Let's face it, right?
Right.
Because you're writing to a theme.
You're writing it. Oh my God.
Yeah, and you don't write to the metaphor. It
This is
comes
a
out, and
whole
then you're like,
conversation.
"Oh, that's interesting."
Yes.
That interests me. Where the hell did that come from?
Well, and also a poem might not reach you in one moment. And then fast forward a couple of years, you pick up the book again and you read a poem, and all of a sudden you're like, oh God, because of stuff you've gone through. I've told this
Too
story
late.
before. I'm looking at it, but it's too far for me to be able to see it. It's this book of essays. You're gonna know exactly what this is. I'm trying to read it from here, but you could make this place beautiful. Maggie Smith.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I had heard someone very literary, we'll say at one point, I read this book, I didn't like it, it didn't speak to me, put it back down. Fast forward 6 months, I believe this individual's either husband or partner had left, or she had left, something had happened. She picked up the book again and fell madly in love with the words, because now they just hit differently.
Yeah.
And so I think that's true of books, period. But I think that's part of their magic, is that they something won't work and then it will work and then it won't work and then it will work. And poetry is so easily digestible, and yet so, again, it's like deceptively easy, because people think, well, how hard can this be? I've got this, like uh, like Milk and Salt is not a good example because that's a longer one. But in the very beginning, you have, the Yew Tree or 16, kind of these little shorter poems or Vertigo. I loved Vertigo. Just wow. Like for me, and I'm someone who's, not to take it too literally, but people also take it how they take it. And I battle vertigo like a lot. And just the way that you weren't really writing about vertigo, but it felt vertigo. Like I was like, this is how I would describe vertigo.
Right.
Right. So if I met someone and they're like, I've never had vertigo, I don't know, I'd say, read this and tell me if you understand this.
Right.
And if this feels familiar, now you understand vertigo. You just didn't know how to put a name with a feeling.
Yeah.
Right. So, second to last question, what are you excited about with the launch of this one? Does it feel sort of like a coming home, because you started with poetry and it kind of made its way into the Paper Palace, but now it's on its own?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's probably at least 15 years worth of work in this, but of course it's like pieces, out of God knows how much work I had to boil down to what. And the best part of the sort of discovery for me was that when I printed out the ones I'd finally chosen to give to my editor, who would then, I knew that, they'd want to get rid of some and keep some, and went, okay, what's the book? That's when I switched gears into like an editor head and went, oh, wait a second, those are da 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 da. And if I arrange them in a chronology of a woman's life, and not necessarily my life, it's always really important to say there's lots of mothers in there, there's lots of women and narrators, and some of it is completely, but it's all personal. It's just not literal, of course. Having said that, when I saw that there was this arc, what really interested me was that it's about point of view. That when I was writing from the point of view of myself now or an older me, the narrator is a more evolved character, evolved person. The relationship between the narrator and her mother is completely different by the end of the book, right? And it's so interesting that like you're writing so viscerally, So when you're writing something and you're writing from a point of view of a child, that point of view is so different and the feelings are different. And so that was really interesting to me. Like I feel like the narrator, develops like a more of a sense of humor about things as well, in places, but also, panic, and also, all of the things that we all, somewhere in there, I think there's something that everyone has gone through, not in every
Yeah.
part of it, but, whether it's heartbreak, betrayal, falling in love, fear for one's children, love for one's children, childhood stuff, beautiful stuff too,
Yeah.
and aging, coming to terms with things. It's the story. I just feel like I hope it's a sort of, it's a more transcendent arc in it. And I think when you say it's deceptively small, it's because I think a, a big arc.
You just made me think of something. Do you think that with poetry, when you're doing it in this way, where it's like the way you just described, so you start at an earlier point in your life, maybe your childhood, and you're writing from that perspective. And then by the end, you're writing from your current self or maybe even your future self. It's when we read fiction, we see the arc of the main character and her or his growth. But when we read poetry, in many ways, not in every instance, we see the growth of the author.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting though is that it's not. I mean, that a poem that I will write right now about about childhood, let's say, that will even written at this age, because so many of those were whatever is, it still has, because you're accessing
Yes.
something, you're accessing a truth, an emotional truth
Yes.
that you're trying to transmute into something, and that emotional truth is what evolves. Your relationships with people evolve. But if I'm writing about some woman in her 20s, say, or I don't know what, but like I will, that character is going to come out as a different character, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like she's
I don't know
still
if
in
I've
there.
evolved at all, is what I'm saying.
No,
I mean,
but
that whole idea of
oh my
older women
God.
being wise, that was always one of my things with Paper Palace. I was like, there's this whole, the only characters like where there's a sexy older woman, a woman in her 50s is like, it's never that. It was always like, that she's the mother who knows everything and she's found somehow wisdom. And I'm like, I get less and less wise.
Well,
I knew the path was long when I was 5. And all I can tell you now is like that the shoes just arrived and I won't go for a run.
yes.
These are the things I can tell you today.
I am wearing workout clothes just because I'm tricking myself for the 30,000th day in a row that I'm going to go work out, and I'm not.
It's too hot.
It's
Way too hot.
funny. It's too hot. It's too everything. When I was 20 or in my 20s or whatever, I would see, so I'm 52, and I would see like 50s as, oh my God, those people are so well, A, old, and B, wise. And now like, I see posts on the socials and people will say, oh, I'm having my 50th, birthday. And I think, God, you're so old. And then I go, well, shit. Like
Yeah.
I'm there. And then I think, why am I not wiser? Like, well, really thought that came with this.
Yeah. Well, there's that. By the way, there's a line in one of in the one that's called Shrink Wrap, which is basically, exactly that, where the character is saying, I don't want to spend the rest of my life feeling with like a child. And, he says, but you're going to die a child. You're always going to be your mother's child. You're going to always be your father's child. Like, guess what? That never
That
changes.
never changes, which I kind of like.
Yeah.
I kind of like that I'll always be younger than someone. That's the way I look at it. Okay, last question. What are you reading now, or what have you read recently that you just really loved?
Funnily enough, one of the things I loved most recently that I read was a memoir by this author, Peter Godwin. It's called Exit Wounds. And God, he's a good writer. Highly recommend it. It's about his whole life in a way, but it's also about the year of his divorce and his mother dying. And he's a British writer who lives in New York and has been writing for years and years and years. But he's really funny. And I was so moved, and so many moments, like you say, I don't know if at any other time in my life I would have felt the exact same way, but I'm reading going, oh my God, that's me. that was me as a mother. That's exactly, doing his kids' homework, like, oh, damn it, my son's, now taking a course on Egyptian history. I'm going to have to learn about all that to help him write the paper. You're just going, oh my God. Right. But there was stuff like that. And I was just like, I recognize that. I recognize that. Um,
Yeah.
I couldn't, I can't recommend it more highly. One of the problems right now, which is, a good problem to have, but is that I can't really talk about a lot of the things I'm reading right now because I'm reading a lot of books that haven't come out yet.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but that one is one that I just finished, and then like as I say, I really loved. I have so much on my pile,
Yeah.
but when you just suddenly come out of something, you go, everybody has to read this. That's how I felt when I got to the end of that book.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay. Well, then I'll add that to my pile. It's
well,
getting bad. It's
it's
getting
getting
bad,
really
Miranda.
bad. It's
Like
a
it's
disaster.
my mom reminded me a couple of weeks ago of something my grandfather used to do when he would finish reading a book. He would put his initials and the date at the beginning of the book so he would remember that he had read it. Because in the vein of like forgetfulness, I keep pulling books off my shelf and I'm like, did I feel like I've read this. I mean, I do the same thing with movies on Netflix and stuff. I think this is feeling familiar, but I don't remember this scene. So I'm going to start doing that now. It's just putting my initials
That's
because I
very,
have
very funny.
so many. I have so many. There's just
That is
not
very,
enough
very funny.
time.
There's not
Yeah.
By the way, there's not enough time. And then, of course, I end up kind of like rereading, comfort books and,
Oh, of course.
all that stuff. And then you're like, I know I should be, delving into, whatever. And then no, I'm like, oh, I think I'm just going to go back and read Pride and Prejudice
I was
again.
just going to ask you, will you tell me one of your comfort books that you go
Pride
back
and
and reread?
Prejudice,
Pride and
definitely.
Prejudice?
I mean, just ridiculously so. So, yeah. How about you?
Well, I am a little cliche in this world. I reread The Alchemist with frequency.
Oh, wow.
And I love Anna Karenina.
Wow. But those are
Yeah.
not that. I think those are pretty big books that are very impressive to keep
Well,
going.
The Alchemist is a simple read, but it's just so profound and I get something different from it every time. Anna Karenina is not a simple read, but
No.
it's a connection to my grandfather and I just absolutely, I just love it. I
Well, I love
cannot thank you enough.
that. Oh, this was so fun.
Thank you. This was so fun. I will put all of your info in the show notes. So excited. So many congratulations for your launch tomorrow.
Thank
And
you. Well, I hope people read it. It's poetry. I know people are scared, but it's not scary. I don't think this
it's
one.
not scary. I can attest to this. It's not scary.
Yeah, it's not scary. It's not light, but it's not scary.